Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Ever wonder where the devil got his horns?
How about those cloven hooves?
Or that pitchfork?
Wasn't he an angel?
No, he was a snake.
No, he's the great red dragon.
No, he's the beast.
He's the prince of this world.
Prince of darkness.
Well, he's the prince of dark.
Good morning, star lovelies. One of my names is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I sometimes go by Keenan Diaz.
And we're the hosts of the brand new podcast, The Devil's Details. What comes to mind when I say Lucifer?
How about Satan?
What about just the devil? How did the big bad of the Western world end up with so many faces? Join us as we dig up, decipher, and deconstruct the devil's many forms throughout history.
Take a guided tour with Dante through the 9 circles of hell.
Or revisit Satan's angsty bad boy years in Paradise Lost.
Learn the ins and outs of a Faustian contract.
Easier than a 1099, but with a hell of a lot more fine print.
Slither on over to The Devil's Details on True Story FM and join us in the diabolic discussion.
Love and hisses. Mwah! Didn't Al Pacino play him in a movie?
Are you sure that wasn't Robert De
I could
Niro?
have sworn it was Tim Curry.
That was Elizabeth
Didn't
Hurley.
he go down to Georgia at some point?
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we learn that Cobra Kai will never die, that some characters' plot lines will always be reset, and that adults are never, ever, ever around when kids start fighting. Yes, it is. We are back talking about Cobra Kai, Season 6, the final season. Though there are movies coming out still, the Cobra Kai universe apparently will go on forever. It is myself, Matthew Fox, Riki Hayashi, our normal co-host for Superhero Ethics, and returning guest, original co-host, Grand High Poobah of Wrong Opinions, Paul Hoppe. Okay, so we're back in the Cobra Kai world. We have the first 5 episodes. What do we think?
Yeah, so season 6, part 1 of 3 is my understanding. That's how they're releasing
the
this?
first third of season
Yep.
6.
Which is okay. Like that's a
That's
thing you
just
can
the way
do.
it is now, right?
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
If any show can be a guilty pleasure for me, this is a guilty pleasure for me. In that enjoy this. I enjoy this show because I enjoyed the Karate Kid, the original movie, and I feel a little guilty for enjoying it because gosh, there's so many like problematic things going on like in the show universe and like the I guess we'll say production of the show, I'm not sure, that it makes me like, should I be enjoying this? I don't know, but I do because like it was basically made for me and us, right? Like people of our age generation. It's basically the target audience, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to hit a broad swath by having, you know, the protagonists be younger and have that be a way to kind of, I imagine in their mind, try to attract a younger audience. But definitely, I'd say the heart of the show is as kind of
the nostalgia media. Like we get so much of it with reboots and stuff, and this is just a nostalgic TV series pining for the 80s of Karate Kid.
I mean, I think it's both of what you're talking about, because this is going to be a weird thought because all 3 of us I know are very young at heart, but quite a lot of folks our age and of our generation, even a little older, have kids who are about the age of the younger protagonists in this show or a little younger. And I think that what I'm seeing is that a lot of these nostalgia 80s shows, especially ones that are nostalgia for the teen shows of the 80s and movies, it's aimed at us who were kids then, and it's also aimed at, you know, the kids of our generation. The idea that, you know, families can watch together and stuff like that. I kind of have a similar feeling of it. I don't know if I would have watched it if we weren't recording on it, but I wanted to watch it, so I kind of twisted your arm so that we could record on it, because I feel like there's so much that I don't like about it, and so much I'm frustrated about, but I'm still like glad that I'm watching it.
Yeah, I would say that I enjoy the show, but I don't particularly like it.
That's fair. That's fair.
I like that.
You know?
I like that.
And I mean, the term guilty pleasure popped into my head, and like, I don't feel guilty about watching it because I don't feel like a lot of people were harmed in the making of it. And for what I feel like, it's not like deeply trafficking in problematic stereotypes, but I feel like it's, and we can certainly get into that, I'm sure we will, but like at the same time, it's definitely not doing a very good job in the other direction either.
Yeah.
Right. Like I feel like it. There's a lot to say there, and that's a whole thing. But like, I think there's a lot of shows and movies that are or have done a lot worse in those regards. As a martial artist, I find it fun to watch martial arts school related content, and not just as a martial artist, but as someone who ran a martial arts school for a couple of years and taught for over a decade. Like, I can relate to a lot of this stuff, but then also there's this like, that's not right. Like, like down to like small things, like watching, them practice Tang Sudo in, I don't even know where they were. I don't know. I thought they were in Korea, but like maybe they were in a forest in Southern California. I'm not sure.
No,
but
I think that was all supposed to be in Korea.
It was supposed to be in Korea. Okay. Because I was watching that. Yeah. You're right. But like, I also feel like that wasn't super clear, because like, how the heck did Kreese get to Korea and back just like that when he's
there's a warrant out for his arrest.
Yeah.
But he's ex-military, so therefore he has contacts.
Yeah, exactly.
Hand wave.
They're speaking in in Korean. They're Shijak, like, come on, like Hana Do Set Net. Like it's like, this is like a Taekwondo class. So it's not Taekwondo, it's Tang Sudo, which is another martial art. But then they're like, sensei. I'm like, and to be fair, I've never practiced Tang Sudo, so I can't say authoritatively you don't call someone sensei in Tang Sudo. But like in Taekwondo and any other Korean martial arts, as far as I'm aware, like that's the Japanese word. Like you say sabunim or kwangjanim is like the grandmaster, and so it's like, it felt like they were like, yes, we're gonna get these details, but not this one. And I was like, okay.
That seems like a big detail to not get right. Because sensei literally is just the word teacher. Like if you're in school, you have your senseis as well. So it's not like a deeply rooted in martial arts word.
Right.
That would need to be used in this context.
Exactly. And the very first, I just wanted this last bit.
No, go for it.
The very first episode of Cobra Kai, which I rewatched, and I was like, this show was a little better in the beginning. But like, he's like, yes, sir. He's like, sensei, yes, sensei. And Johnny's so insistent on using the word sensei, and it's like, well, would he be? Like, what is that? But anyway, I digress. Yeah. Let's regress or something.
Well, I think for many people, like, it could be a guilty pleasure. It could be just family watching, whatever it is. For some folks, this podcast is a guilty pleasure. And so there are many folks who probably are listening along with us who haven't actually seen the show. And many times I would say, go hit stop, make your life better by watching the show. I can't say that now. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll maybe throw some things at the screen, but some people enjoy that kind of thing too. But for anyone who hasn't, let me give a quick plot summary. And you guys fill in anything that I missed that's like vital. So we start with Peace in the Valley. The antagonists from last season have all been arrested or been otherwise taken care of. All the romantic pairings have settled down among the teens. All the family situations and dojo versus dojo stuff has settled down. Everyone's happy under Miyagi-Do, Eagle Fang. We just don't have a name yet. And there's peace. And when Danny says that in the first opening scenes of the episode, of course, you know that that won't last. Turns out that everybody's been invited to this world fighting tournament, a world martial arts tournament that is maybe a world karate tournament, but is not really said that. That is maybe an under 18 only tournament, but that's not actually said. That is, you have to be like some of the best in the world, but 3 of the teams from a regional part of one state of one nation have all gotten invites to. That's interesting. But the point is that's happening, so everyone's trying to train, and there's tension between Danny and Johnny, as always, about what's going to be the name of the dojo and who's going to be the focus and what's going to be the focus. Johnny is kind of back to a lot of his same old ways, which I don't love. We'll talk about that in a bit. But also he's going to become a parent. So there's just this kind of like, there's tension. They kind of settle on that we'll do a kind of Miyagi-Do, but have a little bit of Eagle Fang in it. There's a fang now over the tree in the logo. Johnny tries to like embrace Miyagi-Do, but also to put a little of the aggression into it, and there's some ridiculous sexism involved in that in a slumber party scene. But moving on, there's a lot of little like hijinks that feel like they're fun, but are also just kind of like killing time. There's a plot line about what college some of the kids are going to go to. There's a plot line about Johnny trying to find a new apartment. But all this time, we've also found that Kreese has gone to Korea, back to the school of Sensei Kim, Uncle Kim, Grandfather Kim, I guess he's referred to here. For those who watched the last season, the woman who came in to be a co-leader with Kreese of Cobra Kai, who was absolutely not a sexy Asian dragon lady stereotype, not in the slightest, I said with some sarcasm. We find out that she only got trained by her grandfather because Kreese like fought to help that happen. He has to come back and prove himself to the same grandfather, and when he does, by having hallucinogenic situation, by being bitten by a cobra, realizing that he has to stop trying to save Johnny and kill the cobra, kill Johnny, and basically become a Sith Lord, because then he then tells everybody that like the way you defeat people with heart is to be heartless and to embrace your anger. The words he says are actually pretty similar to the Sith code in a way that I found kind of amusing. And so all this is building to a number of things. Tori is still having problems. She doesn't feel quite accepted by the group. And we find out that her mother winds up dying. Her mother had always had serious medical problems. Some of them were drug-related. Her mother dies. She doesn't tell anyone. And because the next day is supposed to be the big challenge to pick who are going to be the captains of the team that's going to this big tournament. The Shikai, is that how you pronounce it?
Sekai Taikai.
Sekai Taikai, thank you. Knew I could get that wrong. We'd already had a couple of competitions to find out who are the 6 from Miyagi-Do who are going to go and represent. And now the question is going to be who's going to be the captain. And the boys fight. Robbie wins. He'll be the captain. The girls are in the middle of a fight. Tori is clearly very upset, but she's fighting well. And when she is presumably very likely about to make a point on Sam and even up the fight at 2-2, the fight stops because Danny LaRusso and his wife Amanda LaRusso have found out that Tori's mother has died, and they have decided on her behalf that, of course, she must not want to fight, and so the fight should be stopped. And they make a big deal about how she's not in a right mind to make this decision right now. She gets angry and storms off. They immediately decide, well, then she was in the right mind to quit, so we're going to replace her on the team without any attempt to win her back. And then we all get to the tournament, and the different teams are introduced, and then here comes a Cobra Kai team with a couple of Korean fighters who we saw, who there's a whole plot line there about, you have to slay the master in order to become the master. Again, very Sith related here. Although the apprentice gets to stick around just with a very bad black eye this time. And then who will join them as their female captain? Of course, it's Tori. Is that a fair overview of the main issues we discussed, with the main issues that come up in the season?
I feel like you skipped the bake-off baking competition or whatever other irrelevant activities they did to choose these 6. Like they get this bar and what was he in 3 or something? He's the guy who got his furniture store burned down. And,
yeah. Oh yeah, that's right.
And just in the martial arts aspects, like he actually, his uniform or his belt says Shotokan on it, which is a specific style of karate that's like not the same as whatever else the rest of them are doing. Right. But they ask him to choose the 6, and then he has them play like capture the flag, and like it's all just very like, let's turn this into like one of those reality shows where we're like eliminating people and who will be the last 2 eliminated. You're safe and you're safe, and it's just like, okay, like,
yeah.
So that I felt like was actually the main thing. Oh, and then there's a thing with Miyagi has some like dark past that we didn't know about, and I
skipped that because I hated it.
Yeah,
but,
right, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, it honestly to me it felt like it was kind of all over the place, and the main idea was Miyagi-Do choosing 6 members to go to the Sekai Taikai. and then Cobra Kai doing the same. Well, did they have any other female students?
No. Which is
so she's
funny
the female captain by default then?
There's funny
because there's
there's a whole plot line about the grandfather not wanting to let his granddaughter train because girls shouldn't do martial arts.
Right.
He lets her train. She's the master of the school now.
Yeah.
But there's still no women.
Right.
I want to get into the martial arts. I want to get into the plot and all of that. I do just want to first, though, say a big thank you. We've been getting more and more people signing up to become members. It is a fantastic thing to do. Only $5 a month, $55 a year. You become a member of both this podcast and our Star Wars Universe podcast, Star Wars Generations podcast. You get free content. You get bonus content at the end of episodes. You get some bonus episodes that have been coming out on Star Wars. We're doing them in Superhero Ethics starting in the fall. And most of all, you get to help support the podcast. It's a great way to help us keep the lights on. We're trying to upgrade our microphones and other audio equipment. All that is done through the membership. So if you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy what you're hearing, please think about giving just $5 a month, $55 a year. All the information is on our website. And of course, on that website also is all the information about how to give us feedback. Over on the Acolyte on Star Wars, we have a couple of great pieces of feedback we're going to talk about. We would love to get some more about Cobra Kai. We have other episodes coming up on Superhero Ethics that are going to be mostly based out of feedback. Send us tweets, send us emails, send us messages through the website, messages on TikTok. Often I would say carrier pigeons, but they're probably not very kind to animals. So while Paul is here, I would say only if this is like a pigeon that has landed on you and has like let you know it wants to be a carrier pigeon of its own free will, which would be quite a story, and I probably would want to invite you on to tell us about that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
Other than that, please think about becoming a member. Please send us in your feedback. Now, back to our conversation. Let's talk about how martial arts is portrayed in the show. Because it seems you both have, and I will say, I want you to know how diverse a perspective on the show we have, because Paul can talk quite a lot about his time as a professional running a martial arts school. I can talk about my time as a professional car salesman, which is also a very important plot point, and is also, I think, done as inaccurately as some of the stuff about martial arts is. So either Paul or Riki, take us away.
Do it, Paul. Is this even karate?
I mean, I don't know. Like, yes and no, right? So here's the thing. When we first covered, I think seasons 1 and 2, and maybe 3, I forget what was out. I think we did 1 and 2 back in the day. And my guess was that Cobra Kai was based on Kyokushin karate, which was created by Masoyama, who was Korean Japanese. And it has this reputation for being extraordinarily brutal and just like he invented this like 100-person kumite where like you fight 100 people in a row as like a test. He fought bulls, which I'm not in favor of, but I will say he did it with his bare hands. And if you're gonna fight a bull, doing it with your bare hands seems more respectable to me than having some, manufactured weapon. But like it was this style that like really clearly to me matched up with kind of the Cobra Kai style. It turns out that Cobra Kai is actually more based on Tang Sudo, which is sometimes referred to as Korean karate, right? Like the first time I took Taekwondo, my teacher S. Henry Cho, which was one of the first people to teach martial arts in the United States. He had a dojang on, and he called it Korean karate, and he wrote books called like The Secrets of Korean Karate, and this that might not be the exact title, but that was basically because Americans were familiar with the word karate, right, or karate, or however you want to, whether you want to pronounce it like in Japanese, or I feel like there's an English American pronunciation that like is like an English word now. But that's kind of neither here nor there.
And the martial art itself has evolved, as you said, like with the mixing of cultures and styles.
Exactly.
First in Asia and now in the Americas. Like you look at like mixed martial arts like jiu-jitsu, like how they have thrived and grown in South America. Like Brazilian jiu-jitsu like is a thing.
Yeah,
it is very different from its roots.
Yeah.
Right.
And Tang Sudo, the name means like way of the China hand or fist, right? Which is also what karate originally meant, right? And then in like 1935, the character that was used for kara was changed because I think it's like a homophone, right? So like empty hand.
Yeah. Okay.
And that just happened to kind of coincide with Japan attacking China and stuff like that. So, there was like but at the same time, like, it's very legitimate that like the roots of karate came from China like hundreds of years ago through Okinawa. And then Okinawa also, I think, was independent, right? And then got annexed or and in Korean martial arts, in Taekwondo, like, we have two patterns that are named after Korean patriots who have a very anti-Japanese history. One of whom was the pattern's called Jungun, named after An Jung-gun, who in the description of the pattern is referred to as the Korean patriot who assassinated Hirobumi Ito after the 1910, the like Korea-Japan merger is how it's referred to, which seems like, I don't know if that's
an interesting euphemism,
right? And like, that's like the most formative, like,
some would call it
difficult,
conquest.
right? Some would call it that. And I think the assassination and then the upholding that person as a hero kind of says that, that's kind of the general implication. And then another one, Moonmu, which is, these are like two of the best, most important Taekwondo patterns, and they're named after these like very anti-Japanese, pro-Korea people in history, but at the same time, Taekwondo, original Taekwondo, which is much closer to the kind of Cobra Kai, Tangsudo kind of thing you see, where there's like this greater severity of training method. The nominal founder of it, General Choi Hung-hee, he was a second degree black belt in Shotokan. He lived in Japan during, the Korea Japanese merger, and then he became a general in the Korean army, and then actually got exiled because another general did a coup and yada yada yada. But the point being that, like, even this like Korean martial art that's like, this is a Korean martial art, and it's like to the point where the patterns are named like in a very like anti-Japanese way, like its progenitor or like the kind of the head of the founding, because it's all complicated. There are a lot of different influences, right? But even he did karate, for years, to the point of being a second degree black belt. And so all of these martial arts are, I want to say, they're distinct but related, right? Like the same way humans are distinct individuals, but we're all related eventually, right? Like if you look back far enough.
Well, and I think this might be a good way to kind of think about where the lines are, especially because in this show, one thing I like about the season is that we're kind of backing away from beating up people you don't like back to an actual competition of a sport, with still a lot of beating up people you don't like. In the Olympics, Taekwondo is an Olympic sport.
Yeah.
If someone who had been trained in Shotokan karate entered that, would they just look weird, or would they actually be like penalized because they were doing things that are illegal because they're karate, not like? I'm kind of wondering.
They just need to learn the rules, really. You know? And I mean, karate was in the 2020 Olympics as well. I think it's been excluded this year. Maybe it'll make it back again. But there's different, like Taekwondo, Olympic Taekwondo, which is distinct from the Taekwondo that I practiced. I mean, we did learn that sparring system, but it's a different from the sort of karate. Like the level of contact. There's like certain levels of contact. It's continuous scoring. So like, if we trade kicks, we can each get fighting that we see in Cobra Kai, which is very true to most karate, as far as I've seen, and have participated in such competitions as well. Is like, it's stop match, right? You score a point, that's it. Stop, reset, go, right? And that's what we've seen in this. I fought in that in like Queens. Like my teacher would send us to these random tournaments, and I didn't do that well, because like that's not what we trained in, And similarly, if somebody who trained in that then came and played ours, And I say played because it's a game of hitting, right? It's not combat. It's combat related sport, really. But if they do that, like, they might hit me and be like, "Oh, I scored a point," and then like I can hit them 3 times, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I don't think training in one style is going to make you not viable in another, but like you have to train for the. I mean, it's not quite like Michael Jordan going and trying to play baseball, right? But like it would be like going and playing basketball where there's no 3-pointer, right? Or like you're not allowed to dunk or something. It would be like, oh, well, that I got to work on my game, right? I got to make some adjustments and stuff. So yeah, I think people who practice any striking martial art could go to a tournament like this, as in Cobra Kai, right? But if you don't train in that specific system of sparring, you're potentially going to have some issues. And I think that might even be a plot point, because I don't really understand how there's individual competitions and team competitions. Like, is it just going to be these stop matches, or are they going to have different types of events? Are they going to have breaking? Are they going to have patterns, or kata? Like, I don't know. That hasn't really been a big factor in the previous seasons or in the Karate Kid movies, but it's
was there not a season where in the tournament they had like a technical skills challenge or something? Or am I thinking?
I believe there was, yeah. And when I say it wasn't a big point, like I think it was there, and it was evident that it was there, and like maybe it was a big point to some characters, right? But like, I mean, in Taekwondo competitions, usually we have breaking, right? Where you have boards, you break boards, you get, like judges' scores, and then you do patterns, you get judges' scores, and then there's fighting. And it's 3 separate competitions, really, right? And then each one, there's going to be divisions in those.
Interesting.
And they actually had kata in the Olympics when they did karate, and which I think is cool. And they say, oh, but the average age was like 30. It's like, is that bad? Like, that's not okay.
It takes a lot of training.
Yeah, exactly.
Better than gymnastics.
Right. Which I think brings us to another point, is like, is this an under 18? Because if it's not, like, the winners aren't going to be under 18. Like, the best fighters in the world aren't going to be under 18. That's just not how it works. Like,
yeah, there's a lot about this tournament that does not make any sense to me. I mean, they've never said it's a karate tournament, so I think that, first, and I can see them, like, especially if we have 10 more episodes basically, and I could definitely see them being, a lot of the episodes being about fighting some of the other teams, and like, capoeira or Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Like, these things are fun to watch, and that could definitely be a plot point.
Sure.
But also, like, I assume this has to be, or either it is a 18 and under tournament, or this is the 18 and under bracket,
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of hand waving that's happening around this tournament. And it's funny because Riki, no spoilers whatsoever, but you and I have different opinions on the pacing of some recent Star Wars shows, not just the most recent one. But I will, just so you know that I'm not always uncaring about pacing. I thought the pacing of this was utterly ridiculous in terms of how it went from like, okay, we have this, like, we're starting to build up towards this tournament. We're starting to have some like decisions to see who's going to go. Oh, and now we're there.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, they basically picked the team and the captains, it seems like, the day before they left.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you like book flights that late.
Yeah. But I mean, maybe the whole team is going and just those ones are competing and the other ones are just gonna like chill in Barcelona. That sounds cool. But like, yeah, it's very weird. I also think, could there be a time jump? Like, could there have been a time jump between the last scene that we saw before that and then that scene, and in the interim, like, season 6.2 takes place, and then the last third is actually the Sekai Taikai. Like, I think that would be a choice. I'm not saying it would necessarily be a good choice.
I don't think
it wouldn't be the worst choice
jump
the show's made. Okay, you think like it's on now,
and the reason is because of Tori. Tori leaves the captain battle in a huff.
Yeah,
and then they go to the Sekai Taikai, and then there's Tori on Team Cobra Kai.
Right.
at this point, in theory, Tori and Robbie are still dating, right?
Well, we don't know though.
Well, they were like they were dating like right up until
they were, and then
the captain fight
stormed up, but he couldn't get in touch with her. However many hours
for the 2 days after her mom died. But what I'm saying is, if there were a time skip and this is like a month later,
right?
Presumably Robbie would know something is up, like Tori has ghosted me or whatever.
Right,
like, It wouldn't be like this big reveal of like, oh my god. I mean, it still would be because she's on Team Cobra Kai.
But she could have just been MIA though, right, for a month, and he's like, he doesn't know what happened to her. Like,
I feel like all of this is part of the larger conversation about Tori, which is one of the biggest plot points, and frankly, one of the things that bothered me most about this season. So, what did you all think about how that was handled?
Like, it feels like the show being very true to itself, of not being deeply interested in its characters and instead being deeply interested in conflict, and just basically having characters work things out when the show feels it's convenient for them to work things out, and having them kind of fall into old habits or just have kind of nonsensical arguments for the sake of sending characters in opposite directions because that's what it wants to do. I mean, it's been doing this the whole time, right? The whole Danny and Johnny thing. It's like over and over. And like, I feel like there should always be some kind of grind between it, right? Some kind of friction. Right. Like, that's natural. There are people who don't really share a worldview, who are trying to get along now, but who were, basically mortal enemies, but like kind of low stakes mortal enemies, and I felt like they really dragged out those two working through their things. And then this season they're like, oh, let's play with that again. It's like, didn't we do that enough?
Yeah.
And then,
sorry, keep going.
Just like they didn't have that blow up as much as it could have. I mean, Johnny tried to start a new car dealership, but then Amanda was like, Johnny, that's not how anything works. It's just,
I like that. I like that moment for her as a character.
Yes.
Because she has watched these two men just do ridiculous things. And she's seen it all, and I think she knows that deep down they have respect for each other now and are friends. But they just can't express it because they're men raised in, 80s martial arts.
Right.
So she has to pull him aside and be like, Johnny, stop being an idiot. You're not leaving. Just
and that was the thing.
Clean up after yourself.
Right, exactly. And it felt like the origin of that conflict was kind of not necessary, but I agree with you that the resolution of it was satisfying.
Yeah. I think I want to talk about the specifics of Tori, but I think you've touched on what Tori is also part of kind of this larger pattern. I think what frustrates me, and it's frustrated me ever since season 2, in season 1, they kind of gave us this really interesting idea of what if the hero and the villain are somewhat flipped, where Johnny was, the kind of person who like has a lot of things that are problematic and that a lot of people are just going to write him off very quickly, but is also a fundamentally decent guy with some shitty worldviews who also is in a really bad situation, is trying to make the best of it. Whereas Danny LaRusso has kind of grown up to be kind of a rich, snobbish creep. And that was a really interesting thing to do. And then somewhere along the line, and there's been a lot of rumors about if this is because of pushing from Ralph Macchio or just different studio folks, they sort of remembered, wait a minute, but Danny is supposed to be our hero. And, having it be back and forth makes some sense. But starting around like late season 2, season 3, it did seem like we got to a point of the LaRussos will have their foibles and will have their struggles, but the Johnnies and the Tories and the Kennys of the world, they're always going to be the ones who are like, maybe they're good enough to be welcomed into the Russos' world, or maybe they're going to be bad and be punished and go back to the Cobra Kai of things. And it feels kind of classist, and it feels in some ways kind of racist, especially in the story of Kenny, which we can get into in a bit. And with Tori, I think I especially felt it because like, yes, I'm bored about her going back to Cobra Kai. I'm bored of that storyline. But especially because, and I don't think the writers know this, as someone whose mother has died, and, you know, I think a lot of people, whatever parent has died, maybe you can understand, or just, you know, gone through any kind of tragedy like that. And for me, my mother died when I was an adult, but my best friend died when I was a kid. I was so angry at Danny and Amanda in that scene because they are so fundamentally wrong. I don't think there is any possible justification for stopping the fight when they did. Particularly given that, like, it's a fight against their daughter with Tori, who's always felt that she's being kind of like condescended to and she's not going to get a fair shake. If after a point you want to say, hey, Tori, we want to pull you aside and offer you the chance to say, we know about this terrible thing that's happened. We want to be here for you. You don't have to go through this alone. You don't have to fight now. Sure. But then when she says, no, I want to fight, and Johnny agrees with her, to refuse to listen to that. And I think we're going to get something in the later season of, you know, them realizing they were wrong and blah, blah, blah. But to me, the double hypocrisy of they literally say you're not in the right mind to make this decision not to fight. But then when she walks off, no one goes after her. No one tries to, like, talk her down. But they say, oh, but she wasn't a good enough decision to decide to quit. So we're not going to, like, go visit her at her home later tonight or tomorrow or during the time jump you're talking about. They just say, she walked away. We have to respect the decision. Hawk, you're on the team. Like, I didn't want her to go to Cobra Kai, but I now feel like she's completely justified in doing so. I have no complaints with her doing so. And I'm going to be rooting for her in the fight because I don't think it's Sam's fault, but I think the LaRussos were completely wrong to the point that I was angry about it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with her mom, I found, I would say, borderline upsetting. Like, if it were a show where I could get more deeply invested in the characters, I would have found it upsetting.
Yeah.
But I was like, who's her mom again? Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, you know, they did so little. At least they didn't do the thing of, like, having, like, a heartwarming moment between her and her mom in the beginning of the episode. And, like, just, like, kind of, like, making the character more of a character just so they could bump her off. But, like, that whole thing felt like it was so deliberately manipulative.
I mean, didn't they? Because they had the whole thing about, like,
they had a flashback.
They had a flashback after she'd already had a.
Oh, you're right. Okay, that was after.
And so it was the kind of, like, drawn out death as opposed to, like, no, you know, Buffy's mom, kind of like that's it, right? But, like, it was. I mean, I didn't like it, you know, but, like,
What it needed, like, we needed her character to appear more leading up to this. And especially when Tori herself says, my mom would have wanted this for me to fight.
Right.
I don't know that, right? Based on what they've given us.
They basically gave us one flashback supporting that.
Yeah. If they had shown, I don't know, like, more scenes of her, like, talking about, you know, why she's doing this, you know, why she's doing karate, or have her show up for a practice and like say, oh, like, you really seem like you found your place here. Like that type of thing, it would have hit real hard, right? Like it hit okay because that's the way the scene played, but not as much as it could have, and that's disappointing, I think. To use a character death.
Yeah, to be clear, I agree with all that. I'm not saying that I was upset by the mother dying. I know. As someone who got told by a lot of people that I was having the wrong reaction to my own mother's death.
Right.
It was them stopping the fight that really upset me. But I do totally agree. I think that we would have sympathized a lot more with her and maybe felt that moment more if we'd had all the stuff you guys are talking about.
Yeah. And to your point, Matthew, like, I think if they found out ahead of time, like, having a conversation would have been a good idea before the fight. For sure. You know, the same way, like, you actually, before a fight, like, lay out the ground rules, you restate the rules, you know, I want a clean fight, blah, 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 stuff like that. And as a ref, as someone who has center ref martial arts fights, continuous fighting, they're, especially with, like, the heavyweight red belts, like, there's this point where people know enough to really hurt each other. and don't know enough to not hurt each other. Like
that makes sense,
there's power, but there's no control, right? It's like someone who can throw a 103-mile-an-hour fastball, but they have no idea where it's going, right? Shout out Nuke LaLoosh. And like, there is a very real, like, stop. Like, we need control, right? And the thing is, either Johnny should have stopped the fight because Tori was out of control, or they should have let the fight go on because Tori was in control.
Right.
Yeah.
Feeling.
They tried to show something like that when, like, she got a clean hit in, got the point, and then did like a secondary hit after that, right?
Yeah, something like that. And that is a legitimate, like, yeah, you can stop a fight because that's going on, and you can give a warning and whatever, right? But like, you can't stop a fight in the middle because you think maybe someone's mentality might be compromised. Like that's not the time to do it. Like, once the fight's going, and you have to observe the behavior. And like, she looks like not super in control, but she wasn't like super out of control either. When Johnny said stop, she stopped, right? And like, that's the litmus test for me. So like, that's just like bad martial arts, and obviously when it comes to like what you feel in response to the death of a loved one, like that's you, right? That's no one can tell you how you're supposed to feel. There's no supposed to. There's just what you feel, and then there's how you process that, how you deal with that. People can be supportive, people can listen, people should be supportive and listen, but like, shouldn't be telling you what to feel. And so I deeply agree with that. And that whole thing was just like, but also to me, that was the writers not really being super interested in their own characters in terms of like, what's this character feeling? Like, what's really, like, it was, to me, it felt like, no, this is how we want to write it. So we get to this point. How do we get her to Cobra Kai? That was what it was. And it was like, it's that same thing so many times. And it's a little exhausting, but the episodes are only like 35 to 40 some minutes long. So it's less exhausting than if they were an hour, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that we're in season 6, and you said you went back to season 1 and it was better. And I think that resonated with me, because I also think like season 1 and maybe 2 are the best ones.
Yeah.
And part of the problem is that subsequent seasons are just rehashing the same conflicts. And they're resetting the characters every season to like now we kind of hate each other again.
Right.
When if you look at the arc of the characters and what they've done, they should be closer than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, Johnny isn't really allowed to grow, is one of the big frustrations. He's
he grows and resets.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think another part of it is, and this way I'll say, I do like this season a lot more than last season, for example. One of the reasons why I like shows about teenagers is that their perception of the stakes is really, really, really high, but the actual stakes are not very high.
Right.
And so I get to watch people be super dramatic about, like, is Johnny going to take me to the prom? Not, I'm saying Johnny in general.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah.
Is this boy going to take me to the prom? Or, does this person have, like, more attention from this paternal figure? Like, those things matter, and they really matter when you're 17. But at a time when, in our own world, there's a lot of things with a lot of high stakes happening pretty frequently, it's kind of a nice escape to watch that. And so when at the end of last season, this kind of fun show about people who fight each other because they're upset at each other, and sometimes it goes too far, and like we've already seen that, we pull back, now becomes adults trying to kill each other with swords.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, whoa, this is not the show I signed up for. And so this season, it being much more about like, no, we're going to settle this in the fighting ring, not in the schoolyard.
Right.
So yeah, I like that they're lowering the stakes, but I do agree that I think like that's part of what I like so much about seasons 1 and 2 is the stakes were fairly low, particularly from the teenager protagonist side. And this time it just seems like, I have no idea what they're trying to do.
But if we're to believe them, the stakes of this tournament are pretty high.
Right.
Like Miguel got deferred from his early admission for Stanford. and he believes, and we have no choice but to believe that this is possible,
right?
That him winning this tournament will elevate his status in the eyes of the admissions.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing: you're rolling your eyes at that, but like,
I don't know. That's what I'm
all-
saying. Like, the show has introduced this as a premise, and we have no choice but to believe it.
right.
Let me just clarify my side.
Yeah.
I do believe that having a big achievement like that would matter in the eyes of a university.
Right.
My side is more that, like most shows that talk about kids trying to get into college, we have either the Ivy League and the Ivy League equivalents like Stanford and MIT, or we have your local community college where people just get drunk and have dumb frat nights.
Yeah.
And like,
are you saying there are other universities?
I am.
He 100% should just go to a state school for 2 years, like, from the cost perspective.
You might happen to live in the state that has arguably the best state school system in the nation.
I will say though that the whole bit with Kyler, and then him being like, I didn't realize that there were other options, that I could have like tried to get into really great party school.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun.
I kind of like that, and like his sort of rehabilitation a little bit. But
like, that was one of the more fun side quests we went.
Right.
I just I mean, they established that stake for Miguel. It just, to me, it
doesn't feel like a real stake.
As much as I love the high school drama, the two plot lines I hate the most are, will I get into the perfect college because there's no other choice, and the love triangle. And
right.
It does seem like we're finally done with love triangles, which makes me really happy. Robbie and Sam are the captains, so they might go back there, in which case I'll throw things at my television again. But I hope we're not doing that. But yeah. But I agree that there are serious consequences for who can do what, depending on who wins this tournament.
And like, there are real world championships of various martial arts, right? Like, there is a world karate championship. There's world taekwondo championships. There's Olympics, right? And there are age groups in various ones, and that, where maybe a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, might win, as opposed to if they're fighting 22, 23-year-olds, like, probably not. Like, you don't see a lot of 18-year-olds in Major League Baseball, right? Every now and then you get like a Dwight Gooden, a Bryce Harper, like every now and then. But like, by and large, like, the absolute best of the best in pretty much any athletic endeavor is not going to be super young, right? Because there's going to be somebody of similar talent level who just had a few years of extra training, a few years more muscle development, bone growth, like, and they're generally going to smoke the younger version of themselves,
Right.
Speaking of who should or shouldn't get smoked and rooting for Cobra Kai.
Let's talk about this guy. Brandon H. Lee.
Wow.
Is the actor playing the
Quan,
primary antagonist at this point, I guess.
Yeah.
Kwon Jae-sung is the character's name.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
he's for real.
He's
for this real. Guy, Paul, you had the resume. Like, tell us what this guy has done.
So, he's an actor and a model, but also a 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo, as like me, right? But I think he probably does more of a WTF, World Taekwondo. I didn't dig that deeply. His father is an 8th degree Taekwondo grandmaster who runs a school, and Brandon also is on the webpage as like teaching at the school. Right. So like, he's a martial arts professional, probably more or less since birth, is my guess. Also, his name is Brandon Lee, which is a lot to live up to.
Right.
Well, he's
to be clear,
not related.
Yeah,
not related.
No,
he's Korean American. Brandon Lee was Chinese American.
In terms of Hollywood, he was a stunt double for Simu Liu in Shang-Chi. So he's got that credential.
Yeah. And I mean, the martial arts in that movie were very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he doesn't, I will say, you guys can speak to his martial artsness, which I don't really notice, but I definitely thought he looked good. But, he doesn't get much to do acting wise. He's playing your kind of traditional rebellious bad boy. But he plays that part perfectly. Like, I
Yeah.
thought I really believed him as the, like, I don't care about this, and he's the Sith apprentice who overtakes the master, while he's the, like,
He
if Luke
overtakes the
actually did,
other apprentice, really, is what he's
yeah, he's
the
the, like, if Luke killed Vader and then Palpatine was like, yes, excellent,
right. Or if Anakin killed Dooku, and
yeah, that's a
yeah.
better example.
Yeah,
But this time
the
Dooku is still
same
alive
idea.
and still fighting, and now
Right,
prove as well.
right. He's not just standing there. Yeah, but yeah, he's legit good at martial arts.
And the standout stunt, at least in this portion of the season, he does a board break. He does a jumping kick to break a board and does 3 rotations in the air. He does 1080.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even know that was possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's ones where he's got one on like his Instagram, like he's got Instagram reels of ridiculous, stunt taekwondo basically, which it's like a whole genre of like taekwondo of like at demonstrations and stuff, but where you break 3 boards going up, like you're spitting and kicking 3 times as you're going up, and it's like pop pop pop. And I mean, these boards are like, they're the little boards that are like demonstration boards, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised like several boards like suspended or whatever, but like, yeah, it's extremely acrobatic taekwondo,
Right.
which is not Tang Sudo. It's like, it's super clear that like he's just doing taekwondo, and is very good at it. So yeah, there's that. I mean, that too, in a way, like all of that was kind of like the highlight of the show for me, was like, and then there's C.S. Lee as the Kwang Janim as the like Master Kim Grandmaster.
Oh
Kim,
yeah,
really,
the other
Grandmaster, but like, and not that it's all great, but it's like there's a familiarity to me, like as being, growing up in Korean martial arts, basically, and hearing them count in Korean and say start and stop and bow and but then when they say sensei, it like breaks the spell. It's like
because that is specifically a Japanese word that would not necessarily be used in taekwondo.
Correct. Yeah.
So you were saying that there's no way that any of these Miyagi-Do kids should be able to stand up to Brandon or the character Quan, right?
Basically, yeah. I mean,
like everything they display is like very TV martial arts, and he's just doing the real thing. It's like, oh, this is different.
Right, exactly. And I mean, there's more to fighting than just being able to do technique in a vacuum, right? We also see him fighting and beating the crap out of like 3 highly trained, members of his school. And that's the thing, is like, that's clearly, these are people who have been training for like their whole lives, more or less. And then you have the Miyagi-Do,
the after school kids.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that's just not the same, right? I mean, I didn't start super young, right? I mean, I trained a little bit when I was like 11, then I started again when I was 17, then I started again when I was 20, and then I went from like 20 to like 30 something. And like, I trained super hard, but there are people I knew who had started as kids, and there are certain things that they just had a facility with that is extremely difficult to gain a facility with when you start older, or when you don't do a heavy amount of training younger. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying the people who are generally the best of the best generally started younger, right? And that doesn't mean you can't acquire great skill. You can. It doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. The point of martial arts in general, of modern martial arts, is to try and improve your own ability, right? It's not to compare your ability to someone else's. That's not like the purpose of it, right? Like, we're not generally training for real world fighting all that much, right? Like, hopefully the hope is you're not actually going to use this very much. So there has to be some other benefit that you're getting from training besides just being able to use it. You do want to be able to use it, and like, if it's necessary, right? And I think somebody with the amount of training as these after school kids do, I think it's very realistic that they'd be able to defend themselves or aggress effectively against people who are somewhat more physical of their own age group who are completely untrained. I think that's reasonable, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think you can learn a lot in 6 months to 2 years or whatever. But like,
Right.
it kind of defies belief that you would then be able to, like, if these kids kept training super hard until they're like mid-20s, late 20s or something, I could see them being really good. But like, to get outstanding at martial arts it's a matter of decades, not years or months.
Well, and not to mention that there's a general level of athleticism that a human can have or not
Right.
have. And
Yeah.
so, like, you were talking about like how like people who are like 18 and very good at one sport or something like that. A person who is starting at age 20 or starting at age 16, whatever, and has been already doing an athletic pursuit of some long time, switching sports, to me, that makes a lot more sense than someone like, I think his name is Brandon. I'm not sure, the nerdy kid who's Hawk's best friend.
Dimitri.
Dimitri, thank you. He's a great character. I really like him as a character. And to me, the idea that like he learns enough to stand up to the people who've been bullying him and like get in a good shot every now and then, that's a totally believable story. But the idea of this person who just was not an athletic person in any way, shape, or form, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think that's a great, I certainly was that in many ways, could all of a sudden go to being a, martial arts expert enough that he gets to go to this tournament just really beggars belief.
Right.
He's a skinny nerd who got into MIT on his academic record. So pretty much solely, right?
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
And if
but now he's also been invited to the world championship.
Yeah, and if he trained like super hard for 5 to 10 years, maybe you find out what his potential is. But like, the idea that he's reached anything, like the people who are competing at some world championship should be somewhere near their potential. Right? Like, there's a learning curve, and like at a certain point it starts to level off, right? Where it's hard to actually improve beyond the point you've gotten to. Not impossible necessarily, but like where you get close to whatever your potential is. And for different people, it's going to take a different amount of time. But like, it's just probably not like a 1 or 2 year thing for even for like a great athlete, right? I mean, you could probably get really good pretty fast if you're just a phenomenal athlete. And it was interesting watching the first episode. There's a picture on Johnny's fridge of young Robbie, like when he's like a little kid, with a soccer trophy. So it's just like a little thing basically telling us that like Robbie as a little kid was won at soccer or whatever. Like it doesn't necessarily mean he was great at it, but I think we're like meant to believe like he's a naturally athletic kid who's done a lot of athletic things. Soccer involves kicking, martial arts involve kicking, it's like, and honestly, like actually people who are like soccer players, like gymnasts, like there are certain sports that cross over better with different martial arts, right? And
I'm sure.
And I mean, I think athleticism really plays a huge role early on and then further on. Like it'll kind of determine a lot of maybe what your absolute peak might look like, and it'll also tell you a lot what you'll look like early on. You get in there a little further and it's like really hard work is going to be a whole lot of it, right? But like kind of your floor and your ceiling, I think kind of your athleticism are going to determine a lot of that. But then it's a lot of hard work, and it's hard work over years and then maybe decades, right? So like I feel like anybody with like less than 10 years training, like really you're gonna at a world championship, like unless it's like, oh, so you did kung fu for like 10 years and now you've done karate for 2 years, okay, you could probably be pretty good. Like,
well, that's why I'm just still so lost in this idea that like 3 different schools from the valley
right,
this,
yeah.
There's a lot more we can say about this, but there's 1 or 2 other issues that I want to make sure we touch on. And unsurprisingly, for the 3 most winded guests that people we ever have on, myself included, we're going pretty long already. But I want to talk about race a little bit, because I think the show is trying to be a very kind of like multicultural, diverse show, and in some ways it's getting that right. I kind of have always loved the Miguel storyline. Particularly the way like they've played off Miguel and Robbie being the white kid, but also a little bit more like kind of disadvantaged in some ways than Miguel, but not in some other ways. But both with the Kenny storyline and also with this idea of like we're paying so much attention to Miyagi-Do is like pure and right and good, and that's from like the original karate of Okinawa, and then Cobra Kai is from Korea in this place where like you have to go like survive a snake bite and like maybe get sent to your death, and it's all very like Sith like. It feels like there's some messaging going on there, and I'm curious kind of what you guys are picking up on either of those storylines or in other directions as well.
I mean, at last, we get to have our revenge. But the we, I mean Japanese. Not that we've been like super downtrodden, but I think we're gonna talk about Ip Man later and the way that they portray Japanese people in that, understandably from like the history of that franchise, like what it's depicting.
Yeah.
But I needed this. I needed a little bit of no. Like Japanese people can be the good guys.
Right.
No, but it's to your point, Matthew. It's weird. Like I don't get it, especially because this show already, in my opinion, has done a poor job of representation of Asians for Asian martial arts themed show. Like pretty much all the main characters are white. You get a little bit of Chosen sprinkled in, but none of the kids. I guess Devin might be like half, right?
I would say none of the kids except maybe Devin are Asian. I do like Miguel is one of the main characters, and he's Latino. But yeah, I hear what you're saying in terms of Asian representation.
And you get into these questions of what is enough representation, or like what is correct representation. There's no easy answer for that, but I feel like an easy answer for a show called Karate Kid is you have to center it a little bit more on Japanese culture and characters than they have done. And then to bring in this major evil faction as Koreans it's just kind of like comically bad to me.
Right.
In a way that I seriously like question whether there's a cultural consultant on this show, like in terms of like Asian matters, because there are other things where there's been like Japanese writing on some of the Miyagi-Do stuff that's just like not good. So I wonder what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
I mean, it's interesting because I think the villains being Korean goes back to the origin of the series of the Karate Kid, where the what's his name? Kamen. I forget his whole name. I keep thinking Michael Kamen, but it's definitely not Mike. Robert Mark Kamen. Apparently, he took Tang Soo Do, which is
wait, who was he? Was he the writer?
Oh, yeah. The writer of the original Karate Kid.
Okay.
So he took Tang Soo Do and did not enjoy the experience. Found it too kind of Cobra Kai for his liking, and then he took Goju-Ryu, which is what Miyagi-Do really is, and enjoyed it, and basically wrote a movie where the villains were Tang Soo Do practitioners but called it, karate, right? They didn't call it Tang Soo Do, which honestly is kind of authentic, right? Like I saw Cobra Kai at some point. I think they described it, maybe Johnny did, as like American karate, which I think is a thing, right? That's a thing where, and like Kreese being an American soldier who learned martial arts while in Asia and then brought it back and then taught it with his own, kind of American machismo kind of thing. Like, I feel like there is something legitimate to that story. Like, it actually rings true.
I mean, in many ways, it's very similar to I think it's the last or one of the last Ip Man movies.
Yeah, 4.
We get a similar dynamic of like that karate as Americans understand it might be a melding of a number of martial arts, but also has this very American, very like rah, we're going to win. There's no such thing as losing kind of thing. And I felt like some of the middle seasons of Cobra Kai were more of that, where of like Cobra Kai is very Americanized in some not good ways.
Right.
And that's what's weird to be, oh, no. But all the problems actually go back to Korea.
Right. And Kreese, who was in Ip Man 4, by the way.
Oh, was he? Okay, that's cool.
Yes. there's a scene. It's just an Easter egg, but the guy's like, "Drop and give me 50, Mr. Kreese," and it's like clearly a reference.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
To Kreese from the. So which is funny because obviously the Ip Man movies do not cast the Japanese as the protagonists.
No.
But also don't cast the Americans as the protagonists or the British. If you watch this, I think the second one. But anyway, so I feel like there is this, and there's a legitimacy to the lineage actually being Korean, and there is a realness to like the brutality of some Korean martial arts. And as far as forms of karate in Japan that are also very kind of brutalistic, at least one, Kyokushin, which I mistakenly thought is what this was based on, was founded by a Korean Japanese person, right? I mean, because he moved to Japan and lived there from maybe age 15 or something. So I don't know exactly like how Masoyama identified, but the point being that like this isn't just like totally made up and let's just make like the Koreans the villains because, right? But like that doesn't mean obviously that like all Korean martial arts are like that, or like all Japanese martial arts are like Miyagi-Do. Like it's super weird though, because it's like they took two real world styles and then made up styles based on those real world styles, and then they have not a lot of representation of people from the countries and cultures that those styles originally came from.
Yeah.
And it takes place in Southern California, which last I checked, there are like a few Asian American people in Southern California. Like the demographics of the show don't feel quite spot on. Although obviously different areas are different, but like, most martial arts schools have, okay, I shouldn't say most because I haven't been everywhere, but like in New York and California, you'll often get a fair number of like Asian students, right? Like that's just pretty common. And not necessarily like, Japanese Americans taking karate and like Chinese Americans taking kung fu, print, whatever, like combinations. But like the point being that like, I definitely agree with what you're saying, Riki, where it feels like they don't have they're not deliberate, and I feel like they're not very cognizant of how their choices kind of look like overall, and sort of which characters have more of a voice and which ones don't. And in a way that I feel like the Karate Kid, like, I mean, it wasn't great in that regard, but like I feel like Miyagi was by far the most interesting character.
Yeah, and I think one of the fundamental problems that this show has from the get-go is that unfortunately Pat Morita passed, right? And could never be a character on the show.
Yeah.
So they have to constantly have like these callbacks and references.
Yeah.
And play a little shamisen music when they're thinking about him.
Right.
But there's like not a very good viable replacement for how central Miyagi was to the original franchise.
Yeah.
And they brought in Chozen. But unfortunately the problem there is that the actor is third generation Japanese.
Yeah.
So he actually doesn't speak Japanese.
He doesn't speak Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yuji Okumoto. So, and that's not his fault. Like he was cast in a movie in his 20s and was like told to be Japanese and like, all right, like this is the role I can get.
Right. Yeah, in the 80s in Hollywood,
yeah,
won a lot of options.
And I think they have done the best they can with his characters and his limitations in terms of like what he says and how he speaks. But it's just it's not very authentic, and unfortunately, it does a disservice to the story to not have like an authentic Japanese character.
Yeah,
imparting the ethos of Miyagi-Do, I feel like.
Right.
Well, it's funny, I hadn't thought of it until this moment, but it feels like we're almost definitely going to get flashbacks to a younger Miyagi in the second part.
Because we just got the reveal that he was in a Sekai Taikai and has a bloody bandana.
Right.
So,
I'm not
I don't
crazy
want-
about that storyline, but like, and I don't love prequels, but like, I don't know. I'd watch a story about a younger Miyagi if it wasn't bad. I don't trust them. I don't trust them to not make it bad, but like, I don't know.
Here's
I don't
the
know
way
either. Like, who do you cast? I
Because
guess.
because then you would be centering his character.
Yeah,
You know.
Right.
I
Curious
mean,
to see that.
And I do feel like it could fit into one part of the story that I want, because I do feel like overall Danny LaRusso is in the wrong in terms of the things that are happening. And I think one of the things that he's doing wrong is how much he has mythologized Miyagi and Miyagi
yeah.
to the point where the idea that he has any kind of a hard past really upsets him. And given that the original premise of the show is that people can grow beyond their pasts with people like Johnny and Robbie
Right.
and Tori, I think there could be a very well done story about Danny coming to understand that Miyagi was this wonderful person who had a troubled past, and maybe he should stop judging all the other people around him because of their past. That could be a very good story.
Yeah.
Do I trust these writers in this
Right. If
situation to
only.
do that right? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I think one example of that is just really building on something I think, Riki, you said, that it doesn't seem like there's a cultural consultant. And I think, Paul, you were saying that it feels like they're not doing enough to be thoughtful about the things that that are happening. Also, Daniel Berry, some sports highlights, has subbed in and says Tori rejoining was predictable. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good comment. I think that, it felt like they're going back and back and back. Let's talk about Kenny, because Kenny again started out last season, maybe it was 2 seasons ago, but as another interesting story of the kind of kid who gets bullied, learns to fight back, and grows up into the bully himself. And I think that itself is an interesting story and can be told from any racial background. But the way that they've taken him, especially in terms of like him being this very very kind of like streetwise, hard-nosed kid who just wants to fight at every opportunity and doesn't want to listen to anybody, even though I feel like his anger at Robbie is completely justified. It did not feel the most racially aware portrayal of that character.
Well, both of them. So Anthony LaRusso was the bully.
Right.
And then
and then
Robbie took Kenny into Cobra Kai
and then
when it was still reasonable, and then left when I think Kreese came back or Silver showed up.
Right.
And left Kenny there. And then that's what poisoned Kenny to the point he is at the start of the season. Yeah, I hated. I'm gonna use the word hate, which I try not to use, but I hated the scene where the four of them, the power couples, are trying to convince Kenny to come back to Miyagi-Do, against his will.
Yeah.
And against his brother's will, and they're like, yo, leave us alone. And they're like, no, like, you have to come with us, like, it's for your own good. And I hate that they ended up being right, like, in the story. It is what he needed, but that's not the way that should have been done. And it was very uncomfortable for me.
I feel like making it clear that he's welcome and has a place there, and if he comes to the point where he decides he wants to do that, like, that they will be happy for him to come join them there. But like then,
but instead they have to have a fight because it's the show,
right? But we're gonna fight you to show you
how much we care,
that you don't learn the wrong things about fighting from.
Right, especially because we're gonna fight your brother because clearly he's the bad influence and we're the good one.
Well, and then it was so weird how the brother was so against them. And then all of a sudden he just like spun on a dime, and it was like,
but the way that they fought was very defensive and caring or something like that.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Well, they could have hurt you, but they didn't. it felt very not real. And to me, I don't know if it was like super stereotype, whatever stuff, but I feel like some of this is just what happens when you only have like 3 or 4 black characters. Like,
Yeah.
If, I feel like almost any choice is fine for any one character. But the problem is, like, I mean, it's a show that has a lot of characters. They've gone through a lot of characters,
Yeah.
and I think it's medium in terms of representation, in terms of like at least diversity of people on screen. Like, it's reasonable. It's kind of like Hollywood's improved, and I feel like it's improved with Hollywood, but it's not on the forefront, but it's also kind of not at the tail, but it certainly isn't great in that regard. And it's like, it's just, the characters who are centered are, I mean, they're not all white, or they're not all white or whatever, but it's like, at first, like, I kind of thought it was interesting that there weren't a lot of Asian characters early on, right? And like that the one main Asian character was kind of like a bully, but then there was like another one who was like, sort of like the god figure of Miyagi or whatever. But like,
he wasn't even like, he was a bully for sure, but also he was not interested in martial arts. Right. He was not interested in, like, he didn't want to eat sushi. He wanted to eat
right.
We're talking about Kyler in season 1.
Yeah.
I thought that was fun, but not if that's the only Japanese kid you have.
Exactly. Like,
right.
It was a funny subversion, but then that was the only Asian character we got in season 1, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, more or less, I think.
Yeah.
So, and again, like, you're in Southern California, and it's like,
you're in Southern California running martial arts schools.
Right.
There should
Exactly.
be more Asian people just around.
Yeah. And I mean, there was like at the All Valley, whatever, like, I think there were schools that had more Asian students. And like, maybe not a ton of Asian students are going to like be like, yeah, I'm going to go train with that guy, like Johnny Lawrence.
Right.
But like, I don't know.
I will say, just going back on the Kenny point of it, Daniel also brought the point that I think is right. He wrote, Kenny may join Cobra Kai again. And honestly, I feel like that would have been the much better reveal. Like, to have Tori go do this again.
Yeah.
Because the idea that Kenny never really left Cobra Kai, that he still kind of believes a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so he comes back. Like, that would have made much more sense, right?
Right. Especially if he found out that he'd gotten, poisoned, basically, with the laxatives.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah. We haven't even talked about that part.
Right.
But there's a weird thing going on with the girls a lot of the times, right? Like with Tori and Kreese, it's obviously like very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That slumber party. Like,
that
was Johnny really like
was he really gonna stay over?
Slumber party with 3 teenage girls?
What are you doing, man?
It was how was I know it's a TV show, but come on. So sometimes you gotta be like, no, not like this. This is how I feel.
Well, and just it also because his idea of that they need to hate each other in order to fight well.
Right.
I mean, again, it's like the Sith ideology of like fight from your hate. It's just all over this, which is kind of fun. But even more so, it feels to me that the emotional place you need to be in order to fight versus compete in a fighting sport are very different. And and maybe it's not, but I feel like getting me to want to beat up my friend is going to be a hard thing to do. Getting me to want to score points on my friend in a way that we are both trying to hit and kick each other, knowing the other's trying to do it to us too. I'm not someone who knows anything about this world. I know something about it from like tackling, like, some of my best friends, I would be happy to get into like, tackling matches with, which we're going to do some real harm to each other, but that's very different. It felt like them fighting, but that's not martial arts at all. Paul, you're making a face. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I soft agree with you. Like, I do feel like I feel like their problem wasn't that they didn't hate each other. It was that they felt that their reconciliation was tenuous.
Yep.
And so I feel like they didn't feel like they could go hard against it. Like, there's 2 ways that you could really go hard against someone. One is you hate them and you want to cause them harm. And 2 is that you respect them and respect that they're going to defend themselves properly, and that they're not going to take it personally when you are doing the thing you were there to do. Right. Like
Johnny and Chosen resolving their differences, but still wanting to fight feels very much like that second thing where it's
For
like,
sure.
yeah, we're now buddies. We've resolved our conflict, but yeah, we want to fight because we're both good at this and we want to see who's better.
Yeah, and I mean, my friends
that
and
was
I used
cute.
to. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I love that bit. Like the whole thing leading up to it, I could have done without. But that was another thing where I felt like they got the resolution right, even if the conflict itself felt, goofy.
Yeah.
But like, my friends and I used to get together every Sunday and just beat the crap out of each other. And like, but like within certain rules of this is what you do, and like at the end of it, we're still friends. Maybe we're better friends than before. It's like, there could be like a bonding thing of just like beating the tar out of each other because that's what you're there to do. You're practicing fighting. How do you practice fighting? Well, by fighting, right? But like, we're not trying to break each other's knees or noses or like various things. And so if there's a weird dynamic, it's just going to be hard to do that, right? Because that dynamic is going to be in the way. So I think Johnny was right that there was a dynamic in the way that wasn't working, but he was wrong that the dynamic had to change back to what it was before. It didn't. And it worked. His plan backfired and worked because it backfired. And I kind of like that, except for what the actual plan was in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, I think them just having it out and then actually reconciling in a like, okay, we cleared the air. We didn't just kind of say, okay, we're good with each other. Like we actually cleared the air and now we can fight. Like,
well, especially because it felt like also it was mostly an excuse to be able to say, yes, Johnny has gotten better about women enough that he can hold down this relationship, that the mother of his girlfriend really likes him, that he's much more accepted in these ways, but isn't he still kind of a laughable misogynist with all of his silly ideas about girls?
Right.
And that just felt awful.
Yeah, and I think they just want to hang on to things like that. And speaking of Carmen, like she had like 3 lines this season or something. Like,
yeah,
I feel like they really leave a lot of characters just kind of like for,
Well, they introduced too many.
Yes, they introduced so many, but they want to keep their runtimes short, and they want to have this maximization of like conflict and action. And those things you just can't. You can't do all those things and then actually keep up with all your characters and have them all feel real.
All right.
Which is why apparently there wasn't a single adult who wanted to step in at the batting cages when the kids started fighting each other.
Right. Well, there's no adults in that world. We've discussed this. We know there's
that's
no
golf
police.
and stuff. There's always fights breaking out the golf and stuff.
Right. Exactly. That's the end stuff.
Frat parties always, get into fist fights and stuff.
Yeah.
All right. I'm ready for my rant.
Oh yeah, bring it.
So the
I want to just say
one thing quick.
Daniel had said, imagine if Robbie and Sam get back together. Daniel, I know you're kind of new to this podcast. That's awesome. I've already given my personal rant about love triangles and how I'm so glad we're not going back there. So I'm glad you're here. Please stick around. Bite your tongue. Anyway, Riki, you were saying.
The Sekai Taikai is BS. End. No. Okay, so the word Sekai Taikai literally means world tournament, and that's it. So again, we don't know if it's karate, is it all martial arts, mixed martial arts? Like, what is this tournament? I looked up the logo. Actually, it does have the Japanese characters, Sekai Taikai, like very small in the middle, but like up across the top, big in English. Across the bottom, it says best of the best in English.
Right.
And then it's got like 20 flags around this circle. With Japan at the top.
Right.
But I don't understand this tournament and this organization and what is it supposed to be like. Again, like a lot of the stuff on this show, it feels too much like it was written by white people because of just like the way that they named it, the logo, the director or whoever this guy is a European Bond villain, I called him.
Yeah.
And it's not like an international organization. And you can have, it doesn't have to be an Asian person, but given everything else that this show has done, probably should have made it an Asian person and probably should have gone to Japan and not Spain. I did not understand those choices at all. It's a good thing. We've seen a rise in martial arts in Europe. That's great. But you haven't done enough with Japan.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that's because Barcelona gave them some really good rate on
Oh
filming.
yeah. No, absolutely.
I mean, yeah, tax breaks. Although it's obviously because, Miguel speaks some Spanish and his dad's going to be there and have, a language advantage. And
I forgot about that storyline.
Either that or they thought there would be some like really nice second unit photography. But
yeah.
And that when they walked into that hall, it just looked very cheap. Like Matthew, you and I have been in a lot of like convention centers, and that just looked like generic convention center dressed up with a few banners. It just didn't look good.
That's how most martial arts tournaments are like.
But the Sekai Taikai.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But like,
well, especially because
at least
like,
what it's supposed to be.
Right.
The way they did it as though like, look, here's every team taking part standing in different places of the mat.
Right.
I don't mean to keep harping on this 3 teams from the Valley thing.
Yeah.
But like, if there's 3 teams from one part of the United States and there's like 15 teams in this thing total, that sounds, like the way they're figuring it out, I thought this was going to be like 200 teams, and some kind of like, final 64 kind of thing, or round robins or whatever. I think you're right, Sam. It feels like it's written by people who don't have martial arts experience, who don't have cultural experience of the things they're writing about. And I think that goes true for both the Asian stuff. I also know that the first couple seasons of Miguel and his family, there was a lot of Latino and Latina commentators who were really unhappy with it. That apparently has gotten better, but that also felt very much like written by white people. Especially the idea that like they would tolerate Johnny for a second, given the horrible racist things he was saying. But it also just felt like it's exactly what the plot needs it to be. It's the world's biggest thing, but it's only 12 teams because that's going to look really good for that reveal moment with Tori. It just, none of it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I'm not even sure that they're actually filming in Barcelona. I think they just like took the wide shots of the tourist attractions that you would know.
Yeah.
And then they like walked into a convention center in California.
I mean, that's pretty standard. Like, why would you go to a convention center like a sound stage in Barcelona to film? I mean, maybe they'll have some on location outdoor
I
shots,
really hope so. They need to do something to make us actually believe that they went to Barcelona.
Yeah, and I mean, just architecturally, it's
beautiful,
gorgeous city,
right? So I mean,
all right. Well, in our bonus member section, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the wider Karate Kid universe and what we might be seeing in the future. But for everybody else, thank you all so much for listening. Riki and Paul, do you have any last comments?
I mean, the last thing I was going to bring up, I'm going to bring up after the thing. So definitely become a member. But overall, like, I guess I still enjoy the show, not enough to like rewatch episodes. Aside from, I was like rewatching the first episode of the series kind of for research purposes, mostly to be like kind of reground myself and like, okay, what exactly, where did we come from here? How did we get here? I feel like the show is true to itself in, it wants some fun fights. It wants a lot of drama. It wants characters to learn and grow and reset and learn and grow and reset. And like I guess like I enjoy it, but I don't like it that much. And I wish there were more series that captured the things that I do like about the series without the things that I really don't like about the series. I think that would be cool. I mean, I think it would be interesting. Like, are we going to get some other like martial arts kind of series that's like, I don't know, maybe a little bit better with representation, both in terms of culturally and in terms of, and racially and in terms of like martial arts culture.
Yeah.
It's not the Queen's Gambit of martial arts.
I think what you said about enjoy it but not like it is perfect. And then even if it wasn't the podcast, I wouldn't watch it if I didn't have people to talk about it with. Like, I do think it makes me think about things, and I enjoy our conversations about it. And for that, I enjoy watching it. But if like no one else knew was watching it, I probably wouldn't watch it.
Yeah.
I would just get people to watch it.
Right. You did. That's what you did.
My last thing is, I genuinely hope that some of these kids, they're young adults now, but some of these kids from the show become huge stars because they deserve it. Like,
Yeah.
We can talk about how quote unquote fake the martial arts is, but they're still doing like a reasonable enough job. And some of the acting is very good from the kids, especially Sholo Maridueña, who was in Blue Beetle, right? Like,
yeah.
I really have high hopes for him in the future.
Me too.
Blue Beetle, unfortunately, like, he was very good in it, and there are parts of it that are very good. It was not a good movie, which I think is too bad because I think he's perfect as a superhero.
Yeah. He was great as Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle wasn't great, but
yeah.
Yeah, I totally second what you're saying, Riki. I feel like the acting exceeds the writing, which is a hard thing to do, I think. And I think the martial arts are very good for non-professional martial artists. And the thing is, then when someone like Brandon H. Lee shows up, it's just like, oh, right, that's what like a real martial artist looks like doing martial arts. And I respect that the show has the actors doing a ton of their own stunts. I think that's great, but I think it shows because they're not stunt people. They are actors who have learned some martial arts.
I agree, Paul. I think that's what elevates the fight scenes, is that they are able to like be on their faces and show them doing these things. Gives it that realism, even if it's not like realistic fighting per se.
Right, exactly. Well, it looks like good Hollywood fighting.
Yeah,
is what it is.
Yeah, and like when it is the kid, the actors, I think, have had enough time and training and athleticism and all these kind of things that they can get something equivalent to, a kid who's been taking martial arts once or twice a week after school. And so like in the early seasons, that's what the actors were at about that level. But now that they're going up against world-class people, and from the Korean team, some of the actors are world-class martial artists as well as good actors. I do definitely think that guy who's playing the young Sith, if nothing else, he's beautiful. He is good at martial arts, and he's good at being a bad boy. He's definitely gonna get some starring roles soon.
Yeah, so, I certainly hope so.
We will see. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to our listeners who are chiming in. We're going to start putting the times and topics of this on our website. We got a couple things to figure out to make it happen. I just need to sit down and do it, but we're going to start doing that because we love people who sit and kind of jump into the chat with us and watch us as we're streaming. It is another way to get the free bonus content. Everyone else, though, you do have to become a member. For our members, we'll have some more bonus content for you, for those who aren't very sick of our voices by now. For everyone else, thank you all so much. Send in your feedback. We have spoken.